Welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Cady, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And we have an awesome guest who is a family physician and also a podcast host. He's known as the Chef Doc. He's also Dr. Colin Zhu. Thank you for joining us today.
It's such a great privilege and pleasure to be here with you guys. So.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to learn a little bit about your story. I first discovered you on Instagram, and I just thought you were doing some really cool stuff. But we always want to start from the beginning. And if you don't mind just letting the audience know, what was your interest even in going into medicine in the first place?
Yeah. Great question. So number one, definitely excited to actually talk to two other DOs as well. So very, very excited. So my journey through medicine is I didn't come from a long line of MDs. In fact, it's quite the opposite. My mother, who's the person that raised me, is also a Chinese medical doctor. And she's been practicing traditional Chinese medicine, herbs, acupuncture, pretty much for like 4 decades now. And having grown up in her office, I, learned how she worked, and she was a one-man show. She did the front office, back office. She was the doctor, janitor, receptionist, call person, scheduler, everything, I think she only started hiring employees maybe like 5 years ago. And she's currently 71. And she's still practicing.
That's amazing.
So through her, I learned the concepts and ideas of, compassion and empathy and looking at the person in a holistic, manner, and treating, the person beyond what they look like, what they say, their signs and symptoms, things like that. And so, she really, had me understand, the person and their story behind them. And that's how I got myself into medicine. I fell in love with osteopathy. I didn't even know it was a thing until maybe junior year of college. And pretty much, I just resonated with its principles and tenets and, whole body approach, body, mind, spirit, everything interconnected. So I just applied to just DO schools. So that's how I got into medicine.
Yeah. So when you were in medical school, first of all, what was it like? What's your perception looking back on it? And was there any question as to what specialty you go into?
Yeah, good question. So I went to West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. Shout out to them. And I loved it. I loved my experience there. The DO schools, they're kind of, depending on where you go, they're kind of like hit and miss because they're so spread out over the country, obviously a lot fewer of them. And, I was very happy to be with a school that's, historically been around since the early 70s. And we had a lot of great professors who were, extensively published, et cetera. And I fell in love with osteopathy. They had a huge, extensive training in osteopathic manipulative medicine. And for those of the audience that doesn't know, we're basically using our hands to diagnose and treat pretty much all the different ailments of the body, from the outside of the skin to, all the way down to internal organ level. And I loved it. I'm a very dynamic person. I love to move, and I really enjoy the anatomy and physiology and the extra osteopathic training, to be able to learn. To answer your question about specialty, a fun fact actually, because I know you guys are pain specialists, I actually was more interested in going into physical med and rehab, a PM&R doc actually. And I was actually exploring, pain and spine and things like that. It wasn't until I took a inpatient rotation at the famous Marion Joy Rehab Hospital out in Wheaton, Illinois. And I realized that there wasn't enough medicine for me. And so I started going back into exploring medicine in the different specialties. And I came upon family medicine, family practice, as being the most comprehensive, broad, diverse, and I loved it because, it wasn't really, when I followed a lot of mentors, I realized that there was always somewhat different, somewhat of a new case all the time. You'll never be bored. And I like the breadth of, from delivering a kid all the way to an elderly age, you'll be able to take care of them all throughout that spectrum. And so it presents its, inherent challenges. And I'm a person that really, enjoys having challenges, both personally and professionally. And so I thought that was the best fit for me.
Yeah. So I guess the next phase is you decide to go into family medicine residency. I assume that was just kind of like your standard routine thing. Where along that residency training, was there anything about yourself you learned, or something about medicine or the environment, or anything along the way that gave you this light, like maybe a light bulb went off, like something needs to change or needs to be different?
Yeah, definitely. So when I went into medicine, my initial approach was to kind of marry East and West medicine, similar to what my mom was doing. And when I went into the curriculum and throughout the years, I started realizing that a lot of the pathologies, a lot of the chronic diseases and conditions that we face as a nation were more related to lifestyle related diseases, like obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. And I realized that in my training, I didn't receive enough nutritional / lifestyle related education. I think the most recent survey that polled medical schools was back in 2010, and they did a national survey, and only 27% of them actually required a nutritional course. For me, at that time, I only received 10 credit hours. It was mostly biochemistry. And I'm sure, between you and me, it's not enough and it's not comprehensive enough. And so I said to myself, what do I do? And so my path was very non-traditional. I graduated off cycle. I stayed back to become a teaching assistant. So I graduated off cycle, and I had 9 months to spare before I matriculated into my family practice training. And I said to myself, what do I do? Other people went into research. Other people, went on vacation. They did something, to kind of enhance themselves. I decided that I wanted to learn more about nutrition, but not just about nutrition, but more about what food was, what food was about. What is the best way to prepare it? Where does it come from? How do you source it? And how is it applicable for all these different things that we see on a day-to-day? And I decided to enroll myself in culinary school, and I enrolled myself into the Natural Gourmet Institute. And it was one of the very first schools at the time in the 70s to be a leader in health supportive and plant-based cooking, culinary arts. And so I went into that in Manhattan, graduated, and then, I went into my residency after that.
Wow.
I'm going to kind of delve into that a little bit more. Did you have an interest in cooking beforehand? Or did that all just come from recognizing the effect of diet on health that you chose culinary school?
Both. So I was very blessed to have both parents cook and very well versed in the kitchen growing up. I know a lot of people can't say that. And so I was very familiar in and out of the kitchen. My mom, directly and indirectly, taught me. So did my dad. So I'm Chinese, in background. I'm a first generation Chinese American. My parents came in the early 80s. And they were traditionally just more like Chinese cuisine, Asian cooking, things like that. My mom was more of the adventurous type, and knowing that she has 2 American children, they're going to have different, palates and different, tastes and things like that. And, growing up, we didn't eat the most healthy, before my mom really dove deep into her career. They initially came in, they both waited tables. My dad was a college janitor at the time. My mom was, waiting tables while she was pregnant with me. And before she became a Chinese medical doctor, and before my dad became an engineer. And so, our ideas and our perceptions of health wasn't there solidly at the time. And so we grew up like everyone else, eating fast food and, eating all these different things without knowing the ramifications that it would have on our health. And so, I was familiar in and out of the kitchen. We have plenty of family gatherings, and, I would contribute and help and things like that. So that helped me to kind of get a basic understanding of going into culinary school. And that's how, I kind of refined everything afterwards.
I think that's really interesting because oftentimes people, well, at least physicians, we know we don't know enough about food, we don't know enough about diet. And I think the common sort of default is, well, let me go learn more about diet, like more of a dietitian sort of standpoint, rather than, well, let me actually think about the food and the application of these concepts as well, and moving into culinary school. And to me, that's just absolutely fascinating. And it seems in a lot of ways also very creative expression, because now you're not only learning this information, but then you're doing direct application. And how do you present food in a way that is beautiful and tasty and interesting? So could you kind of just delve into it? Like, what were your first experiences then when you were moving into culinary school? You graduated medical school, you know you're going into your family medicine residency. What was that journey when you were in culinary school now?
That's a great question, because during that time happened to be kind of like my first year of really digging deeper into myself as a human being and as a person. And that was where I would like to call, my first year of my self journey, my self work that I did. And so what that means was not only coming out and learning about medicine, but, what does it mean to be out there in the world? What does it mean to, because as you guys know, and, people in your audience, I don't, the general public who are not in the healthcare profession, majority of us go into this in our 20s, right? And we spend X amount of years, whether you're a medicine person or a surgeon, we just, dedicate so much years. But a lot of that is, comes at a cost, during the times where, that's kind of like the evolution and maturity of being like a full grown adult. Like while we were in school and training, everyone else was already in a career, a job, having families, getting married. And we're, going through the library stacks and, doing all these different things. And so, we're just putting endless hours of time and energy. And so the reason why I say that was the first year, as I went into culinary school, that was the first year where I started digging deeper into myself. So I started reading a lot about self-help, self-empowerment, the personal journey. And so to answer your question, the culinary school aspect, not only about food, but it started to hone in a certain type of expression of myself. Chefs would like to consider ourselves as artists at the end of the day, but just in the food scene, right? And so these different things that came in my life really, really helped to mold me to becoming, me at the end of the day, not a version of me that someone else wanted or what I perceived that I needed to be because of society, because of culture, because of, a certain generation. That year really prompted me to be a individual, right? And then I realized that over time, a physician, a chef, a podcast, so all these different things are just merely expressions of myself. And so, learning about me was, the creativity that I had the pleasure of exercising and practicing with.
Yeah, it makes me just think about, I'm really glad you said some of those things about, diving into understanding who you are and not these preconceived notions of what, I guess society wants from you or what they're going to be most proud of. I guess, I'm kind of curious just to dig just a tad bit more in that direction. I guess, how do you splice that and figure out or dig into that and figure out how do you know if it's really what you want or it's being influenced by others? Like, was there anything that kind of like an aha moment for you because there's a lot of physicians out there that I think they've kind of been taken down this path and they just think that's who they are because that is how they've been programmed, even though they don't consider themselves being programmed. Was there anything that helped you kind of tease that out, or what was the best thing for you to help you with that?
No, that's a great question. I would say a couple of things. Again, I said earlier that I really followed a non-traditional path, and it had a lot to do with really honing into your gut and honing into your intuition, right? That kind of compass of yourself, and whether to rely on that more so than something else, you know, whether it's like someone else's opinion, a guideline, or, you know, someone's, you know, teachings, you know, and they're all important, right? At the end of the day, it's about using different tools that you have at your disposal. Kind of like as a DO, you know, OMT is just another tool in our toolbox in addition to medicine and surgery, right? So, you know, for me, it was a lot of trial and error, you know? So after I graduated culinary school and after, you know, I finished, you know, training, I said to myself, what am I going to do? A lot of my colleagues traditionally would sign up for a hospital system, or they would join a group practice. And before I graduated from training, I met a physician that, you know, mentored me. And I realized that before she went into her New York City based practice, she did locum tenens for a couple of years. Mainly I think it was in Pennsylvania that she did before she created her own practice. And I said to myself, what's locum tenens? And I started to research, kind of like that aha moment of, what's osteopathic medicine, you know? And so when I allowed myself to be open-minded and dig a little deeper, you know, you realize that, you know, there's more choices, there's more pathways, as opposed to what others have been doing. You know what I'm saying? So as long as you're open and you look earnestly for these different choices, you can go down and see what will work for you. And then, long story short, I spent 4 years in locum tenens. I practiced in 4 different states in various different types of settings. And through that, I, you know, said to myself, this is what I want to do. And, you know, you just kind of, it's kind of like, you know, Michelangelo, you know, the Renaissance artist, you know, and though, he would do a sculpture, right? What he's actually doing is that, you know, he's just chipping away the pieces that are not supposed to be there, right? As opposed to having a, you know, a picture of what he wants, right? And so little by little, that's how I like to perceive it, is that little by little, trial and error and the ability to be open-minded and to, you know, do something, make mistakes or have failures and say to yourself, it's okay, gets you a little bit closer and closer and closer to who you need to be at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah. You're giving yourself permission to explore, to really refine who you are and know what you don't want. Would that kind of align?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, like, it may not be an overnight thing. Sometimes it may take, you know, years sometimes. But honestly, it's not really, you know, it's a cliche, but it's not about the destination. It's about the journey, you know what I'm saying? And that process of self-discovery. And I think, you know, as human beings, that's, you know, what we're, you know, at the end of the day, you know, that's the whole point of us being here, is about self-discovering yourself and, you know, inquiring, you know, why you're here, what's your purpose, you know, where's your drive? And only you can answer that, in my opinion. So,
yeah, no, thank you for that. Kevin?
I think that's just as fascinating too, because and it has been a theme on this podcast more than often than not, is you almost feel pigeonholed, right? There's this rush. You get into this educational process where it's a fire hose of information, and then that immediately goes into, you know, first 2 years, second 2 years clinical. And what are you doing in the clinical years? Well, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do for, you know, take your test, make sure that you match, figure out what you want to do. Then you dive into residency and the same thing, and you just can't get a breath of air. And what I like about that is the level of awareness that whether it was that little sabbatical with culinary education or just, you know, natural insight, you became aware enough to say, hey, you know, where do I want to take this? Let me explore the possibilities. And I never really thought about locum tenens coming out as a new grad out of residency as this opportunity to do that.
right.
And now it's like, you know, this makes a lot of sense. If you have that opportunity, rather than trying to identify the perfect practice, which you will not find coming out of residency because you do not know all the variables involved.
Yep.
Go out and explore the world. So what were some of the things that you learned through that journey with 4 years of locums in 4 different states under your belt, and as well as having your culinary training? So what were you finding when you were going around the country?
It was a lot of fun. And I think the theme of, I guess, what everyone will take away from this is really just that exploration, you know, phase, you know, and that I feel that it's always kind of like a continuation, you know, for me, I feel more satisfied and fulfilled that I will continue to evolve and continue to learn, you know, because as doctors, Doctore is a Latin, definition of to teach. At the end of the day, as doctors, we're here to teach. And, to teach, we also need to be receiving to learn, right? And so, I use that opportunity to humbly, always be, in that mind frame of a beginner, of a student, of someone that, never really, at least never really wants to master anything, just always in a mindset of continuing to learn. So in terms of locum tenens, I said to myself in the beginning, I was like, even though I'm a family physician, it's like, I don't know what kind of doctor I'll be. I don't know what my, strengths and weaknesses are. I don't know what my style, and, finesse will be, my personality. And so I said to myself, instead of locking myself, in a long-term contract or, because when you come out, people are very enticed and persuaded to pay down your school debt, to not live the resident life, to not, be in a certain, they want to get that car, they want to get that house. And so in exchange for that, they'll get the bigger contract, salary contracts and things like that. And even though money is important and, I said to myself, what kind of lifestyle do I want to lead? And I said to myself very early on that work-life balance was very important, meaning that I do want to work and continue to serve in whatever capacity, but I also want to have enough time for myself, time for my family and friends, because those are important to me, to be able to explore that and also explore all these different types of passions and interests that I have, in addition to the food, And so locums allowed me to do that. Locums, what I've learned over time was, you just go and work. You just go and be a doctor. I didn't have to worry about the red tape. I didn't have to worry about the bureaucracy, the politics. I didn't even do a lot of the meetings. I didn't even have to go to most of the meetings. All I did was show up and work. And so for me, I allowed myself to just get exposed to just working as a physician. And then over time, I started to learn how I practiced as a healthcare professional. My first assignment was out in Vegas. I worked on an Indian health reservation and a big obese and diabetic population. And I, had a lot of fun time with them. I was only there for give or take like 7 months. On average, I, work at 6 months in one place and I'll move on. Naturally just happened that way. And it was more of like, I feel like I've done what I could here and then it's time for me to go. I at the time I wasn't married, I didn't have kids. And so that also allowed me to, traverse the world, in that type of fashion. Not to say that it's impossible to do with a family. I talk to physicians all the time about it. But that allowed me to do that. And then from there, I went to New Orleans and I went to the VA and I practiced there. And awesome, city, history, culture. It was my first exposure to, Southern hospitality. Being a Jersey boy, we're, we like to keep to ourselves, we go from point A to point B and we get things done and, like to keep to ourselves. So my first day walking into the hospital, I step onto the elevator and, a lot of people, it's a hospital, right? A clinic. Every single floor, I'm literally stopping up and every single floor, someone comes on to the car and, you're greeted. You're like, hello, good morning. Someone steps on and then they push the button and we go into the next floor. Next level happens. Hello, good morning, everyone. Next floor goes up. I'm like, what is going on? Like, do they all know each other or something like that? Like, what's going on? And so what I realized is that people are just so nice and so genuine and so good-hearted, good souled people. And I found that in different parts of the country. And you realize that after meeting, so many different kinds of people, populations, practice settings, you just learn what you prefer and what you don't prefer, and how much you would want to give of yourself there. So I went from the VA, went to Seattle. I did community health there, and then I went to Santa Cruz, and then I ultimately landed in California. So and based here now. So
yeah. So you mentioned a whole bunch of hobbies, and we've had many times we've talked to our guests about the fact that we lose touch with our previous hobbies or kind of forget what our hobbies used to be and either try to rekindle them or maybe discover new ones. Besides food, what are your other hobbies?
So I'm a very physically active person. I've been, athletic most of my life. I did track and field in junior high. I played some, recreational basketball. And then around the last year of college into medical school, I discovered triathlons. And so I started picking that up, been doing it ever since. And I just started doing other kinds of races, so triathlons is swimming, cycling, and running, and I was never really an endurance runner. I was a sprinter when I was in junior high. And so I, took up, I just did more of that, because when you go to these different assignments and travel so much because I personally travel all over the world, before COVID, you realize that you have to be kind of like a minimalist in terms of, keeping up, right? I think traveling both personally and professionally really teaches you flexibility and being adaptable and being able to pivot, and that really helped me, in times like this, when the country is under a crisis, and it teaches you, how are you going to pivot in your life? This tests, your resiliency, right? This tests, how your perseverance and your tenacity. And so a lot of my experiences have helped me, it's almost like Jenga, it's like it builds on each other, and it just supports the person that you are. And of course, I, like every other person and human being, I've had my, ups and downs and mistakes and things like that. When I was in residency, I had a bout of depression. In the beginning of the pandemic, I, had a lot of, I've always had chronic anxiety. I have OCD, what I'm saying, and I'm very vulnerable in sharing that. And it's part of, being a person, being a human being. And the more vulnerable you are, the more other people can relate to you. And that's how we connect with one another as people, that's how we connect, as a physician to a patient, because at the end of the day, we are people, I just wear a lab coat, so it's, life experiences teaches you, to really mold yourself, and it really tests you. And at the end of the day, it's more about self-awareness. And, when giving a certain decision or an event or something, some obstacle, you have a choice. Do you face it or you don't? Do you bow down or do you leave? And there's no right or wrong to it. It's just making a choice and being okay with what happens after that.
Yeah. Thank you for just bringing those topics up. There's so much you hit on. I know Kevin probably wants to jump on some of those, but I just want to make a comment that vulnerability and your expression of these human experiences, to allow people in and to, more normalize and rather than shame them for what they're going through themselves. You just made me think of wanting to share the work you're doing with your podcast and with Instagram. Can you just give your purpose or mission, what your hope is, that what you're doing, what it can do for those out there?
Yeah, definitely. So after, in the beginning of my family medicine, I found this organization called the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And I've been involved with them since 2013. And basically they are a nonprofit academic, college specializing in evidence-based lifestyle related approaches to be able to treat, prevent, and reverse chronic lifestyle related diseases. And so that was probably the most resonating type of area that I wanted to practice in addition to food as medicine, which is the reason why I used the culinary education to enhance everything that I did. And so, I took the food, and I took the lifestyle, and then through my own journeys, I created a third component called Thrive Medicine, which, is a book that I wrote, but it's really about, highlighting, thriving and the concepts of thriving, and not merely going about, you know, your day-to-day routines. And so in the book, and what I've learned was that, you know, when you look at society and, you know, as a whole, and kind of how I touched upon it earlier, is that people kind of, if they don't question it, they kind of live in this type of routine default life, meaning that you're born, you know, you get raised by society, parents, church, you know, family, things like that. You're told to go to school, you know, get a job, you know, get married, you know, work until retirement, have kids, you know, and then you die, right? And so it's very, you know, I try to make that as, you know, simplistic as possible. It may sound kind of morbid, but if you think about it, that's how most of us traverse our lives, right? And so I was skeptical about that question. And I said to myself, you know, does it have to be that way? And so over my experiences that I've shared, you know, so far, was that I have lived a very non-traditional life, and I've done a lot. I've been very humbled and blessed that I've touched every continent on this planet. And I've been able to accumulate the experiences that I accumulated to the point where that, you know, I don't live with regrets, you know? So if I were to die tomorrow, I'll be okay with it, you know, because I've been very happy with my life. And so I use that concept of thriving because I personally thrive myself. And so I wanted to teach that to others. And hence that's the reason why I wrote that book. And so, you know, I created the Chef Doc, which is an avatar, which is an online wellness resource that I started in January 2017. And it teaches those three things: food as medicine, lifestyle medicine, and thrive medicine. And so what came after, you know, out of that was, you know, just a lot of resources, tools for people to use, and just, you know, just things to continuously to teach. And I practice family practice, you know, in an outpatient setting where, you know, I love the rapport of physician and patient and being able to teach, be able to empower someone else. But it comes with its limitations. You know, the average, you know, visit for a primary care doctor is like 5 to 7 minutes. And, you know, how much teaching can you do in addition to, you know, medication, prescribing, referrals, looking at your records, right? And not only that, you know, we don't get trained to teach nutrition and lifestyle, you know, bringing it back home, right? And so I took all this extra measures to be able to do it on a grander scale. And so a book is going to hit more people, you know, reach out to more people than I can do in 4 walls. A podcast can reach, you know, more people than I can do in 4 walls. And so that's the point of it, is to create a ripple effect, is to, you know, touch others, to turn on a light bulb, to make them think differently, you know, and let them, you know, have a choice in the matter. Because in order to live the best version of your life, you have to be given out all these different choices, you know? So if I didn't have locums as a choice, you know, my life would have been entirely different, you know?
Well done. Kevin?
Nothing to add right now. We really appreciate the time that you spent. But I do think there's a couple key takeaways. I just want to actually applaud your awareness. The fact of the matter that not only did you do things differently, you saw it as a strength, right? Some people, well, I'm off cycle and this means this and da-da-da-da, but you took this and you took those opportunities and really opened them up. And the other part is, I'm still just, if you have the opportunity, it just seems to me like an almost no-brainer. Rather than pigeon yourself into a practice, do something different when you're coming out of your residency and go into locums. It just seems like that is such a smart decision. I was a military physician, so that was a little bit different. But that's such a powerful opportunity. And then the third thing is this idea of deferred lifestyle, like the deferred living. And I think as physicians, we can fall into the trap so easily where, you know, well, we're supposed to, you go out, you do a traditional practice, you may or not be happy with it, but you save a bunch of money, and then 30 years from now, then you can retire, and then you can do the things that you love.
Correct.
And
Correct.
Why? Like what you're saying is you can do both. You can figure out the balance, and then you're not waiting 30 years from now. You're actually incorporating these key things. It just takes a level of awareness and a decision to do the work and to actually prioritize things to make that difference. So I just want to absolutely applaud you on that. I think that is a lot of insight and wisdom there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it comes back to priority, you know, and being having an understanding of yourself and what you prioritize, at the end. For me, it's about memories and experiences and my time spent with loved ones. You could always make more money, but you can't, renew time. Once time is spent, you can't get it back. And so I learned that concept really early on. And so I prioritize my time in terms of family, in terms of relationships, in terms of, what I want to do. I love traveling, so most of my money went into traveling, and learning about all these different things, other people, it's, material things, I don't really care much for material things. I've lived, when I was traveling, I stayed in hostels. Before Airbnb came along, I stayed in hostels. I stayed in budget places. I lived very frugally to travel, but at the same time I was able to experience and have different types of experiences, and I was able to benefit from it. So it just depends on what you prioritize in life. And so time is short. I was on another podcast and I said that time is short, but time is also, time in life is also fragile, as the pandemic has taught us. And so at the end of the day, why does it matter what society has, for you or has a say? You can even question why, why does it matter if mom and dad has a certain say, or, even a significant other, what I'm saying? And you do respect that, but at the end of the day, it's your life, it's your own shoes that you're living in, right? And so what do you want to do with the time that you have on the planet? What I'm saying? Like, do you want to make a difference? Do you want to be of service? Do you want to contribute? And I think that, one of the keys to happiness, quote unquote, is really being of service. One of the keys of, happiness is continuing to learn and to continue to evolve,
So many great words. Colin, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to give a little pitch for where people can find you and what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me on my website. Pretty much everything, it's kind of like a hub for everything there at www.chefdoczu.com. So CHEFDOCZHU.com. And you could find me on, Facebook. I do Facebook and Instagram are the handles that I use the most at The Chef Doc. And those are, links to my podcast, my book, articles, resources for you to use. What I teach on my podcast is plant-based living, emotional resilience, and thriving. So, and I interview people from all over the world on my podcast, from, doctors, chefs, dietitians, coaches, passionate people that thrive themselves on my show. And, I just love giving that energy back to people and for them to learn something.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your energy on our podcast for the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Kevin, you want to take us out?
No, I'll take us out. I think that's a good place to end here. Colin, thank you so much for coming on to Change Physician. And for my wonderful co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady, and myself, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, this is the Change Physician podcast. Please join us at thechangephysician.com if you want more information. And until next time, stay well.